Welcome to the Story Dragon, and hello. Better yet, if you're a subscriber, double hello. If you want a double hello in the next video, subscribe now, leave a like and comment. Now you might be asking, what is a double hello? Well, despite my lobbying of local politicians to make it legal tender falling on deaf ears, it's still more than most will give you. Now, for those of you that haven't read Furies of Calderon, the first half of this video is light spoilers, because honestly, there is a twist in the second chapter, so I can't not mention it. I spoil up to chapter 4, basically. The second half will be all in, spoilers everywhere, just for this book though, not the entire series. I will make it incredibly obvious when full spoilers are about to begin, don't worry. And as I know that I tend to come across as very negative when reviewing, let me start by saying that I really enjoyed the Codex Alera series, and this book is an acceptable start, if a bit rocky in places, and I am going to be quite harsh on it, because I suspect that my follow-up reviews for the rest of the Codex Alera series are going to be incredibly biased towards outrageously glowing praise. So yeah, I think Furies of Calderon is definitely the weakest in the series, I think that's safe to say, but still strong enough to make me read the sequel thanks to the sheer potential on display here. I read the Codex Alera when it first released, and this is actually a reread for me, but I only have a vague recollection of what happens throughout the series, but the specifics are honestly lost to me outside of one or two main threads. Now, if I had to give the Furies of Calderon a star rating out of a baker's dozen, I'd say it's a solid 7. That is how people rate things, right? Furies of Calderon was released in 2004 by Jim Butcher and weighed in at 504 pages. The Codex Alera series has a rather famous backstory to its creation, which I have no doubt you've already heard, but I'm going to retell it here because I kind of love it for multiple reasons. Jim Butcher was, at this time, a well-regarded author thanks to his Dresden Files urban fantasy series, having released his first 4 in that series before releasing Furies of Calderon. As an active member of a writing forum, he found himself arguing against someone else's terrible take on writing, a position we've no doubt all found ourselves in at one point or another. This person claimed that a good concept and world was required to create a good story, and Butcher claimed that a good story could be made from anything as long as the writing was good. So he threw down the challenge and said he could make a good story out of anything, and so the guy he was arguing with told him to make a story based on Pokemon and the Roman legions. This was the birth of Codex Alera, a 6-book series based in the world of Alera. Now, I actually have more to say regarding high fantasy Pokemon as a concept, and you can find that in the conclusion, but now let's get into the meat of this review with the story and the characters. There are 4 main viewpoints and heroes in this book, and then there are 4 main villains in. I'm going to give them all a quick breakdown at the end, but that will be in spoiler territory. Right now, let's look at the whole thing. We have the true protagonist in the series, Tavi, although quite arguably Amara is actually the protagonist in Furies of Calderon specifically. We have his uncle Bernard, his aunt Asana, and Amara, who's actually a cursor of the High Lord. Essentially, that's a secret agent. A quick glossary for you now. A Fury is the Pokemon-like animal in this book. Except they're not like Pokemon at all, really, and are simply elemental spirits that most people in the world are able to control to some degree or another. There are also wild Furies that exist, and they are pretty dangerous in general. The High Lord is the ultimate ruler over Alera, which is the viewpoint nation we're going with in this book. Okay, I'm going to start with the overall events in the book, and then discuss each character's journey. We start with a prologue which doesn't need to be read or add anything to the book. Solid start. We then get a real open with Amara and are straight into the intrigue as she's on her final examination to graduate as a full cursor, being overseen by her tutor, Fidelius. They have a plan to infiltrate a local legion camp of suspected traitors to the High Lord. They get apprehended and we meet Aldrich X Gladius and Odiana, 2 of our villains. We discover that Amara's tutor is a traitor, and he becomes our main antagonist for the book. That's the twist I couldn't not tell you. Amara escapes capture and flies to the Calderon Valley. Enter Tavi, a sheep herder, and I want to stress this, he is just a sheep herder. He hasn't done anything noteworthy with his life, and he hasn't actually shown any signs of above average in anything, including intelligence. His defining trait outside of being acceptable at sheep herding is that he doesn't have any Furies at his command, which is very odd for someone of his age in this world. Anyway, he loses some sheep and then runs into Amara and gets lost in a fury storm. His uncle Bernard has to come and save him, but they run into a Marat warrior, a standard issue savage nation of people that are literally just savages whose sole defining trait is that they like to fight for no reason. Or, honour or something, who knows. This is pretty important though, as the Marat famously killed the son of the High Lord years ago, and they've been gone ever since, and this sole Marat being back on Alarian land implies another invasion is coming. Of course. Bernard gets injured and his fury takes him back to Bernardhold, the village he's the leader of. Everyone is inside taking shelter from the storm, but Tavi hasn't made it back. The group of villains turn up at Bernardhold to find Amara, who was also injured and has also turned up at Bernardhold. Isana uses watercrafting to heal Bernard and Amara, a scuffle breaks out, and long story short, Cord, a cartoonishly evil character that isn't affiliated with Fidelius, captures Isana and Odiana. Whilst the girls are locked up, Tavi is captured, whilst Bernard and Amara run to tell the local garrison of the Marat invasion. This is the basic starting points for the book. Everything from here on is character drama and wrapping up the plots that have begun. So consider this my spoiler warning. Let's hope I had the motivation and dedication in editing to add some sort of graphic on screen and alarm sound or something, but I'm waving my hands in case I haven't. Right, let's take a look at the individual characters. My favourite in this book has to be, like I expect a lot of people, Fade. Fade is presented to us as a simpleton. He's literally the village idiot. Anytime the most dangerous character in the book, Aldrich X Gladius, is brought up, he mentions a few times that the only person to ever best him in combat is Aravis Valerian. On my first read through I didn't see this coming, but on my second read, knowing what was about to happen but actually not remembering which book it happened in, I was hyped for Fade, and every time Aravis was mentioned, I was into it. Fade has the incredible luck of not being a main character, and so his inclusion can be pure and untarnished by being a viewpoint character and all the negatives that can go along with that. His reputation is built up purely through others mentioning him. Very fun and satisfying character. I can't quite remember what happens to him in the future of the series, to be honest, but I want to read more of him. Let's discuss Tavi, because whilst we all know he's the main character throughout the entire series, there's a good argument that he isn't in this first book, and frankly, thank God, because he kind of sucks here. Now, look, I don't have a problem with the farm boy to epic hero trope, but Tavi is a bit of a damp squib in this, and I hate to say it, a total Mary Sue. He earns nothing that's given to him in this book. He is a nobody. There is nothing special about him. Even the typical nothing special trait, which is perseverance, doesn't really apply to Tavi. Yet, he manages to survive in a fury storm, which everyone else says is too dangerous to leave the steadhold and no one will go after him because of. He shows a skill and aptitude that few others show when it comes to running through a lethal trial. He has a shockingly instant understanding of how thermal vision works, despite having never encountered it before and others not understanding the same thing. And he manages to win over a Marat horde, something no other Alarian has ever managed to do. And yet, in pointing out these glaring flaws, I'm kind of okay with it. It was all kind of fun to read. I liked seeing him meet Amara and go on to befriend Kitai and Daroga. It was good. In this book, he's one of the most unabashed Mary Sues I've ever read in the last decade for me, personally. But I don't really care because it was fun, I suppose. And I assume he's going to get better, right? Anyway, from a character arc perspective, he begins the book a powerless and untalented character and ends the book still powerless and untalented, but somehow loved by all, and those shortcomings of his haven't held him back at all. Oh, okay, yeah. You know what? So as a millennial, I now understand why I found him fun to read. Moving on. We will quickly cover the villains now. Fidelius, outside of the first chapter, is a bad guy. He is already who he is. He has no growing up to do. Once he enacts his plan, he is then on a straight line to accomplish it. He is betraying his master of multiple decades, the High Lord, and helping a rebellion to overthrow him because he believes that the High Lord is weakening, and if the transfer of power isn't smooth, then the people of Alera will suffer as multiple factions will break out in fighting. I could argue against this as a concept, but I'm not even going to try. He's made his decision and I like him as a character. He's shown to be brutal and effective. He wants to help others on a society scale and is willing to kill people on a personal scale to make that happen. And personally, I enjoy the middle-aged man that's already lived his life character in general, and it stays true here. I actually wish Fidelis had stayed on the good side as he seems that fun, but he can hang around in the books, he's good. And you know, I actually kind of wish Fidelis had stayed on the good hero team, because he seems fun. I'd like to see more of him, but it's okay, he can still hang around in the books. He's good. Oriana is portrayed terribly, and I'm not really going to get into it too much here. She gets her own rant later. I think she's rant worthy. No, okay, let's do it here. We have to call this out, but in the middle of a rather typical epic fantasy story, Oriana and Isana get captured by Cord, and a chapter basically starts with, "And so the gang rape continued. Oriana took it pretty hard and well. Nice. And the rapers looked more uncomfortable than the rapee." Ugh. There's a whole bunch of other weird misogyny in this world, but let's focus on this particular scene. It was just such a bizarre choice. The problem is, rape is now so common in fantasy that it's the default abuse of women. So not only is it horrible, but it's so common that it's desensitizing and well known for being just lazy writing. If you actually think the only form of torture a woman can endure is rape, then turn off Google Safe Search and look at Mexican drug cartels if your imagination is really that lacking. Rant over, moving on, let's not dwell. Aldrich X Gladius, second best sword fighter in the entire world, has no moral qualms about killing people, regularly does dispatch his enemies with a single slice, then goes up against Bernard, Tavi and Amara, yet kills none of them. Look, I don't like grimdark books, but I do like realism and don't like plot armor. That doesn't mean I like grimdark, okay? Different things. I would have really liked for there to be a reason he didn't kill any of them, that's all. Aside from that, he's actually a good character and I like having him around as part of Fidelis' retinue. Our final villain is Cord. He's written to be so despicable that we all want him dead. Because of his involvement with the Oriana torture, we're all happy to see him die when it does happen, but I hesitate to even consider him a real character. Like, he goes beyond caricature and becomes cartoonish. Please don't downvote me, anime fans. Back to the heroes and we look at Bernard, or Bernard. Let's go Bernard. He's kind of the good version of Fidelis, so I like Bernard and want more of him. Grizzled and wizened, a backstory in place, highly competent, never flustered. He and Amara get a little thing going, however, which I have to say threw me off at first because, well, in truth I'm not that big a fan of romance in my fantasy, but whatever. And also, I first pictured Amara as being pretty close to Tavi's age, like 16 to 20, you know? And I see Tavi is 16, and I guess I'd place Bernard like mid-30s. Now, I obviously have an imagination, and I understand why there is the fantasy of a mid-30s guy wanting an 18-year-old girl. I mean, I have seen porn, you know? But it seems weird to inject in a book where you probably want your characters to not be caricatures. Not a big deal. Ultimately, just made me rethink people's ages. Maybe Bernard is only late 20s and Amara is early 20s. Who knows? Isana is a good character, shown to be very powerful with her water fury. She's a healer, typically, but we also get shown that if she needs to fight, she can. I also hope to see these offensive powers put to good and surprising use in the future novels. I can't remember what they do with Isana at all. Same as Bernard, she's an older character with a backstory we only get hints of, but clearly there is some bonding incident keeping her, Bernard and Tavi very loyal to each other. We don't know what that is even by the end of the first book though. Yeah, no negatives here outside of the fact that she was anywhere in the vicinity, tangentially even, of the whole Cord and Oriana fiasco. I want to see more of her and I want to see more fully what she's capable of. I think there's generally something quite satisfying about seeing someone that kind of pitches themselves as the healer of the group going offensive and just destroying somebody. I think that's quite a fun subversion, I suppose. And finally, we have Amara, the real protagonist for the book, the one that gets the entire plot moving and manages to throw her High Lord granted power around to get things done. Despite technically being a student to Fidelius, she's competent and is able to outsmart the older man at times. Fine. I'm excited to see her character grow and see what she can become, because based just on what we know from this book, there has to be something more powerful for her to move towards. But when it comes to controlling an air fury, we don't really know what that is yet. We've had a little taste of earth, water and metal, but not air. A few additional side notes. Yes, this is the most traditional hero's journey possible that we've all read 100 times. Incompetent farmhand becomes god tier level warrior in the near future. It's a good trope, no problems when done well. To be honest, for Tavi, it didn't pay off in this first book. I really didn't much care for Cord and everything he caused to happen in the story. Obviously the moral objection, but also just the fact that I had to go along on that journey with the act I objected to. He wasn't that interesting and actually brought down the characters of Asana and Odiana for me. The Marat storyline didn't do much for me. I'm okay with the Savage Horde concept and the different tribes thing and them being cannibals, but I suppose it was taking place with the Mary Sue when I just wanted to get back to Amara, Bernard and Fidelius, who were in the middle of the plotline I cared about. So I guess that could count as a pacing issue? Who knows? So the cover has a very classical high fantasy look, and I'm going to say I don't much care for it. Now, I love fantasy art, I find it very evocative, but I do prefer a more modern style. Odd as it might sound, the main thing that turns me off from this cover is really just the position Tavi is in. I get why he's like that, he's recoiling from storm furies, but it isn't working for me. He looks hunched and awkward, and yeah. I found the covers for this series to be pretty hit or miss for me, but we'll get into those in the next books, obviously. I get the feeling that there's a lot more to the magic system than what we're shown in this book, but from this book we know a few things. A fury is something almost everyone gets control of around the time of puberty. There are wild furies, so whether you have to go and tame one or they just turn up one day, we're not sure. Furies closer to nature are more naturally powerful than those in cities. The elements used in this book are fire, wood, earth, water and metal. That's 5 furies. We know that humans can communicate with the furies, but it's not entirely clear to what capacity yet. We also don't really know the full extent of every element's power. We see a wind fury allowing its user to fly and hear things from afar. A wood crafting allows people to be unseen and fire very strong arrows. Metal makes you stronger, faster and more durable. Fire lets you cast fireballs, but also allows you to affect people's emotions and make them more agitated and angry. We also know you have to be connected to your element to use its power. So a water fury caster without any water around is useless. An earth fury caster, when not touching the earth, can't do anything. A metal fury caster without any metal, like a sword on his person, can't do the things he does. We do, however, get one example of a more powerful user, as we are told the High Lord created a mountain in a day to honour his fallen son, the Prince. The High Lord also called the Fury Storm on the Calderon Valley at the beginning of the book. So we know that large things can happen, but we don't know specifics. We don't know if it's one High Lord only or if others do it as well. We also haven't seen a cost to using any of their furies outside of becoming a little bit tired. Apart from the watercasters, who when doing a very difficult amount of healing can become lost in it, not dying immediately but becoming catatonic and then dying soon after due to lack of nourishment. Okay, let's talk about things that I like. So, I know that I come across as very snarky and like all of life is pain and suffering, and that's probably because it is. But here is my space for unabashed joy. Bernard is a great character for the reasons I've already mentioned, and he's the only guy that really gets a Pokemon in this book. He gets a little Earth Dog Pokemon. When you hear Pokemon crossed with Roman legions, you are expecting Pokemon, And this is the one we get in this book. The world itself. As I read the Codex when I was younger, it has in some ways informed my knowledge of fantasy as a genre. I like that it has noble cities and dark wilds and open magic and different races and scary monsters. The entire book is filled with really great ideas. Roman legions, flying centurions, savage hordes of overwhelming number, angry Pokemon. It's really just a brilliantly put together stew of classical fantasy that's held together with solid and easy to read writing. Butcher took a lot of tropes and they are now my tropes. I lean on them so heavily that I count Codex Alera as mandatory reading, even though all of the tropes have been done before, obviously, and no doubt better, but not for me. Codex Alera had the mixture that I liked. It was foundational. And Furies of Calderon was the lure into the full world that I'd eventually consider a staple of the genre, even though it hasn't been as amazing to read for me now, over a decade later. Obviously, when I first read it, it was something that drew me into the world, and I am now thankful for having been drawn in. So the book, Furies of Calderon, has to get a large amount of credit just for that. And that's not even just for nostalgia. Like I said, I didn't think this book was amazing. Reading it as I have now, I know the world is amazing. Okay, my favourite thing. So I went into this book expecting that my answer here would be Pokemon, right? I want to say the Pokemon thing. That's what I came into this book wanting, but I can't, because the Pokemon this are 95% just elemental spirits. I really hope that in the next 5 books, Pokemon will be my answer here. So instead of that, it's something I've already mentioned, Fidelius. He's a government assassin that has been loyal to the realm his entire life and has realised the High Lord is dangerous to his people, and so as a strong, competent character makes his own decisions to go against somebody stronger than he is, and is doing the work that the High Lords and nobles can't do themselves behind the scenes. He's the facilitator for everything. He's strong, he's smart, he's someone to be feared. In the entire book, he is probably the character that knows the most. Not just of what he's doing, but of the world in general. I just like this type of character, and Fidelius specifically is, in my opinion, really well written. Okay, so the conclusion. I've got to say, this book has very, very little, or bordering on nothing, to do with Pokemon as the original challenge laid out. In fact, there are plenty of books with a much closer relation to Pokemon than this, as if you remove the label of Pokemon and see that it's just a connection with elemental spirits that sometimes take form, well, there are dozens of fantasy books that focus on summoning familiars. That's my one critique of the concept, and it's only an issue I bring up because I want to write my own high fantasy Pokemon book, and when searching for high fantasy Pokemon, Codex Alera comes up and it does not scratch that Pokemon itch. Still a great series, but back to specifically Furies of Calderon now, I just had to get that gripe out of the way. The book was filled with potential, and that's what kept me reading. I wanted to see what happened next to my favourite characters, because outside of a little bit of plot, this is almost a self-contained story. It was strong enough to send me on to the sequel, although that was also somewhat due to the fact that when I first read this, I was mainly enjoying the Dresden Files series from Butcher at the same time. So I gave it 7 out of 13, which, for those of you not quite up to the baker's dozen of stars there, it's a 2.5. I do judge things quite harshly though, keep that in mind. If this was a Goodreads review, this would be a 4, no doubt. I think I really enjoyed it this time because I knew what's coming next and I'm excited for further books, more so than I loved this book. Anyway, if you've made it to the end, thank you so much for listening and paying attention to this entire review. It's been a really long one. I've tried to keep it punchy and as short as I could, but it has turned out longer than I would normally like to do. If you could leave a comment, your thoughts on the book, try to keep it away from the series in general and just Furies of Calderon. I'd love to know. An upvote is always helpful as well. And thank you very much. This has been the Story Dragon. I hope you've had a good day, and I hope you continue to have a good day. Goodbye.